Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. 2 months after his low-energy campaign announcement speech, it's quite clear, indisputably, that Donald Trump, the twice-impeached, disgraced ex-president, is the politically weakest he's ever been since he first declared. And he has utterly failed to clear the Republican field for 2024. The shadow primary to take on Trump is already in full swing. You've got would-be candidates like former Trump UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, former Trump Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, both barely hiding their obvious presidential ambitions. Then, of course, even Trump's own Vice President Mike Pence seems like he is almost certainly gearing up to challenge his former boss next year. Frankly, there are not many political observers who think any of these candidates have much of a shot, and I'm basically in that camp. Although, to be fair, 2 years from an election, a lot could happen. I mean, 2 years before the election, people didn't even know Donald Trump was going to be in the running back in 2014. You can ask all the early prognosticators who thought Jeb Bush or Rick Perry or Bobby Jindal or Scott Walker were on track to win the 2016 nomination 2 years out from that election. But as it stands from this vantage point, I think Donald Trump is still, at this moment, probably the favorite to win the Republican nomination. And if it's not Trump, the consensus pick, very clearly, right now at least, among influential conservatives and right-wing media and donors, crucially, is Florida Governor Republican Ron DeSantis. Firstly, because Republicans think his massive re-election win in Florida 2 months ago will translate to a national victory, a premise, I have to say, I find dubious at best, but who knows. But also because DeSantis is said to embody what many pundits have deemed, either critically or approvingly, Trumpism without Trump. Trumpism without Trump. What does that mean exactly? Well, I guess first we need to discuss what exactly Trumpism is. Here's how I would articulate it succinctly. Trumpism is a political tendency catering to the deep, visceral sense that we used to run things until they came along and took that control away. That's it. And now they run things, and we need someone strong, powerful, potent, who will take the country back so we can run it and make it great again. Now, the we's and the they's in this formulation are pretty clear. They slide around a little bit. The we's, on average, in the main, tend to be white, working class folks, particularly those who are rural, Christian identified, although there are no means the only people who fall into this group. In fact, there are people of all races and creeds who share this feeling about this country and support Donald Trump and MAGAism. And as for the they's, in contrast to the we's, well, the list just keeps getting longer and longer. It's actually sort of a remarkable aspect of this ideology. It's black folks and non-white folks in general. It's LGBT folks and businesses that host drag brunches. It's teachers and librarians and academics, of course, the media, public health officials, woke billion-dollar corporations, the so-called deep state, the FBI, just to name a few entities of an ever-growing, internally inconsistent list of enemies that Trumpism says have power and took it away from you. And the fundamental thing that Trump promised, basically from the moment he came down the golden escalator back in 2015, is I will punish those enemies on your behalf and take power away from them. Here's the thing. He largely failed at that goal. Isn't to say Trump didn't make life miserable for lots and lots of people. He succeeded in that. For instance, just one example, the children his administration kidnapped, or the countless needless deaths and illnesses that resulted from his egregiously negligent handling of the pandemic. But ultimately, in the end, I mean, even the stories that Trump tells about himself, right, that he was brought down by this conspiracy, the deep state, speaks to his weakness. He was too ineffectual to properly wield power and deliver on the promise of Trumpism. He ended up leaving 2 years ago, just yesterday. He didn't get to stay. His coup failed. That's the appeal of Ron DeSantis, the Republican base. They see someone who is delivering on that promise.
Will Republicans use power? This is my question. Will they wield power? Because if you have a single takeaway as the result stands right now, it is that what the Republican electorate wants is a strong executive who utilizes and wields power over his enemies and then destroys his enemies and makes them grovel, makes molten salty tears flow from their faces, as Ron DeSantis did with Disney.
Aw, big feelings there, buddy. Take a breath. Now, he's right. The quasi-fascist creed is what the Republican base wants. This is what Trumpism's all about. And yes, let's count the ways DeSantis is turning that theory of Trumpism into reality, starting with that example you just heard, his feud with Disney. You see, since the 1960s, Disney has enjoyed special privileges in Florida, home of Disney World, which essentially gives the company full control over the part of the state that contains the theme park, Walt Disney World. DeSantis is now working to remove that special status for Disney, a move that experts say could cost Florida taxpayers up to $1 billion. Now, to be clear on the merits here, I don't think it makes sense to cut Disney a special deal. Certainly a discussion to be had about whether or not a multi-billion-dollar company should be given that much power by a state government to begin with. But that is not why DeSantis is revoking its special status. There's no principle here. No, he's just mad because he thinks Disney, the company that makes kids' movies, is too, quote-unquote, woke because it criticized his bigoted Don't Say Gay law last year that bans discussions of any LGBT issues in some Florida classrooms. And so he's wielding the authority of the state government explicitly, tit for tat, to punish Disney in retaliation for the views they expressed contrary to him. The pure distillation of Trumpism, using his power to hurt his and your perceived enemies. And this is just the beginning, right? There's also the disgusting stunt we've covered before in the show, where DeSantis, desperate to push the lie, the 2020 election was rife with fraud, had more than a dozen mostly black Florida residents arrested on voter fraud charges by police because DeSantis argued they voted with felony convictions on their record, even though a bipartisan coalition of Florida voters approved a resolution back in 2018 restoring voting rights to felons, winning over 60% of the vote. And even though Florida election officials had allowed these individuals to register, seemingly giving them the green light to vote. But state Republicans made the rules as confusing and opaque and Byzantine as possible, which resulted in some people who, again, believed they were eligible to vote, voting and then subsequently being accused of fraud because the state determined they weren't eligible after all.
The state of Florida has charged and is in the process of arresting 20 individuals across the state for voter fraud. They did not get their rights restored, and yet they went ahead and voted anyways. That is against the law, and now they're going to pay the price for it. This is a third-degree felony in the state of Florida. They could face a $5,000 fine and up to 5 years in prison for illegally voting in our elections.
Yeah, there he's up there. He's got the police behind him, right? Contrast DeSantis' pathetic wannabe tough guy act there with this little staged photo op with the actual people who had their lives upended for the crime of believing they were allowed to vote.
It's 2 felony charges for voter fraud, but they've reduced it to $500 bonds. So it's $1,000 total.
Oh my God, man, what
so, yes, sir. So unfortunately, right now, we're going to have to take you to jail.
Wow, man. Why are they doing this to me? That's what you're getting? I didn't do nothing to nobody.
So you have a warrant. It's for voter fraud, okay? So I know you're caught off guard, but unfortunately that's how this stuff works, okay?
I'm like, what the hell?
So.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm like, voter fraud? I voted, but I ain't commit no fraud.
Well, so that's the thing. I don't know exactly what happened with it, but you do have a warrant. That's what it's for. Okay?
Oh, my God.
Now, you or I may look at that and say that's odious and despicable what he's done. I suspect there's a lot of people in the base who look at that as like a campaign advertisement for DeSantis. Of course, this stunt eventually fell apart, or it's in the process of falling apart, because multiple charges have already been dropped, including those against the man you saw being arrested a moment ago. But again, clear-cut example of Trumpism without Trump, right? DeSantis using the power of the state, sending cops out, right, to arrest people, to hurt folks his base dislikes. Much like he did earlier this week when he banned the teaching of, get this, advanced placement African-American history in Florida schools. A real mask-off moment for the entire trumped-up debate over so-called critical race theory. And DeSantis understands that this is what is making him so popular among right-wing media and donors in the base. So he's going to keep doing it. Just today, a Florida judge ruled in favor of DeSantis, saying the law prevents the governor from being forced to reinstate a reform prosecutor he suspended last year after the man, Andrew Warren, a Democrat, said he would not prosecute Florida women trying to seek an abortion. Now, the judge in this case seemed to agree it was a blatant case of political retaliation against a public official solely because he did not share DeSantis' politics, but conceded his hands were tied by the existing state law. And honestly, we could actually probably spend the entire hour just listing all the culture war fights DeSantis has picked. in order to convince his supporters he's hurting the right people. That's what it's about. It's the purest form of Trumpism. There's no conceivable policy rationale for any of it. It doesn't make anyone's lives materially better, which, crucially, you'd think governing would be about. It's about us making things as bad as possible for them. And it's why, if anyone has a shot of achieving Trumpism without Trump, it is Ron DeSantis.